On December 3rd, 2013, in the quiet city of Dunedin, a man walked into a house. He didn't speak. His face was hidden under a balaclava. In his hand, he held a gun. He didn't need to make a sound. The fear in the room spoke loud enough. Within moments, the robbery began. It was fast, it was planned, it was violent. That man was Damian Karl Wereta, and this wouldn't be the last time his name made headlines for the wrong reason. Most people go to prison and disappear, but Damian, he became more dangerous on the inside. Inmates remember him not for his silence, but for what he carried in his hands. A sharpened shank, quick strikes, blood on concrete floors, no warning, no second thought. This isn't a redemption story. This is the reality of a man raised in the middle of something bigger than himself. When your father runs a gang chapter, and you're introduced to drugs and alcohol before you finish primary school, you don't dream about careers, you survive. Most men age out of gangs, but some get deeper. This is the story of 6 men who helped build, damage, and in rare moments attempt to redirect New Zealand's most infamous gang, Black Power. Over the years, 6 men have stood out in the ranks of New Zealand's, and behind Black Power gang evolution stand 6 men. Some broke everything they touched. Others tried to rebuild what was left. One of them stood in front of a judge, another stood beside a prime minister. Some of these names you've never heard. And the last one? He might challenge everything you think you know about gangs, redemption, and the fight for survival. So stick with us, listen closely, every name has a cost. And by the time we get to the last man on the list, you'll understand why this story couldn't be told without him. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and if this is the kind of story you want more of, hit that subscribe button. We don't sugarcoat, we don't dramatize. We bring the stories most people are too afraid to tell. Damian Wereta didn't choose this life the way most people understand choice. By the time he was old enough to spell his own name, the decisions had already been made for him. His father wasn't just a gang member, he was a chapter president, a man deeply embedded in Black Power. The rules of that world didn't leave much room for softness or schooling or stability. Damian didn't grow up with homework or school assemblies. He didn't wake up to packed lunches or bus rides. He grew up in a house where drugs and alcohol weren't hidden, they were used openly, regularly. He started drinking while most kids were learning multiplication. He picked up on fear before he ever had a chance to feel safe. By the time he was 7, CYFS, Child, Youth and Family Services, stepped in. But even then, the damage had already started to settle into his skin. Damian never made it to secondary school, never got the kind of structure that could have held him back from what came next. And what came next never really stopped. 76 convictions. That's not a mistake, that's a record. A long one. A history soaked in violence, theft and destruction. 25 of those convictions were for violent offences. That's not counting the ones that never made it to court. That's not counting the fear he left behind in the people who didn't report it. In 2013, it all escalated again. Damian took part in an armed robbery in Dunedin. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't rushed. He wore a balaclava. He brought a firearm. He stormed a home and left with more than just stolen property. He left with a prison sentence. 10 years and 6 months. But prison didn't change him. It didn't calm him. Behind bars, Damian continued to act on impulse. He sharpened a weapon by hand. He used it on other inmates. Repeatedly. The wounds weren't minor, they were deliberate, and they showed one thing clearly: he wasn't done. That's when the system decided they had seen enough. Damian was sentenced under New Zealand's 3 strikes law. He was classified as a second striker, but that wasn't the end of it. The court handed him something far heavier: preventive detention. That means there's no set release date, no countdown, no guarantee of freedom. Only reviews, and a constant assessment of whether or not he's still dangerous. Psychologists have spoken clearly. They believe he is. According to reports, Damian is at a very high risk of reoffending, whether inside prison walls or outside them. But here's where it gets complicated. Damian is a father, 7 children, 7 lives connected to a man who, by every account, has caused more harm than healing. And yet, he's expressed regret. He's talked about leaving gang life behind. He's even mentioned removing his tattoos. Some people hear that and think, maybe there's something left to salvage. Others don't buy it. They say too much damage has already been done. When a man builds his life around violence, how does he ever build something different? When violence becomes the only language you've ever known, is it even possible to learn a new one? Damian Wereta never led the Black Power gang, but his story echoes through the halls of the life he was born into. He is what happens when systems fail, families collapse, and no one shows up to stop the cycle. He didn't start it, but he carried it. And now he's serving a sentence that may never end, not because of what he might do next, but because of what he's already done. Before the fights, before the turf wars, before the headlines and the court cases, there was Raitu Harris. In 1970, when most people were trying to keep Maori boys out of trouble, he was doing something different. He wasn't pushing them away, he was pulling them together, giving them a name, giving them a place to stand. It started in Wellington, a group of Maori youths, many of them raised in state care, disconnected from their culture, separated from their roots, their marae, their iwi. These weren't kids skipping school for fun. They were boys cut off from their own language, their own names, their own sense of worth, and Reitu Harris saw that. He understood what it meant to be lost. He understood what it felt like to be unwanted. So he gave them something to belong to. He called it the Black Bulls. That was the beginning. It didn't take long before the name changed. Black Bulls became Black Power. The upraised fist was borrowed from the civil rights movement in the United States, but the meaning here in New Zealand was its own. It was about Maori pride, Maori struggle, Maori survival. It didn't start as a political movement, it started as protection. But Reitu wasn't satisfied with gang colours and patches. He wanted more. He saw the potential in his people, and he believed the gang could be something different, something better. He started meeting with community leaders, politicians, advocates. He built bridges most people wouldn't have dared to cross, not back then. In the 1980s, while others were deep in gang life, Reitu was running for political office. He stood as a candidate for Matiurata's Mana Motuhake Party, a Maori political party that stood against colonization and fought for the right to self-govern. That move alone set him apart. It wasn't just about presence. It was about power, real power, the kind that votes, the kind that negotiates, the kind that rewrites laws. He didn't let the gang's past silence him. He didn't pretend it was perfect either. He pushed back against the use of violent symbols. He discouraged the swastika. He focused instead on identity, on pride, on family. Reitu wanted his people to remember who they were before the streets took them in. Under his leadership, Black Power began to shift. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in pockets, in small groups. Young men were encouraged to learn trades, to find work, to support their families instead of tearing them apart. It wasn't a clean story, but it was a beginning. Reitu's influence reached deep. He didn't wear a suit to look clean. He wore it to be taken seriously. He walked into rooms where most gang members weren't allowed. And he made people listen. He stood beside figures like Rob Muldoon and Matiurata, not because he wanted photo ops, but because he knew the issues facing his community weren't going to be solved by silence. When Raitu Harris died on July 9, 2017, he left behind a complicated legacy. Some remember him as a gangster, others as a leader, but most agree on one thing: he changed something. He gave the gang a name. And then He tried to give it a future. He wasn't perfect, he wasn't peaceful, but he was present. In the lives of those boys who had nowhere else to go, Reitu gave them more than a gang. He gave them a reason to stand up. And whether or not they stood for the right things, they stood because of him. That Denis O'Reilly didn't come from the streets. He wasn't raised in the gang. He didn't wear a patch because he grew up around violence. He wore it because he saw pain, and he refused to look away. Born in 1952, Denis grew up in an Irish Catholic home in Timaru. For a time, he believed he might serve as a priest. He joined the Marist Fathers Seminary, wore the collar, said the prayers. But 1 year into it, he walked away, not because he lost faith, but because he found something else, something urgent. He had watched maori men being written off again and again, by the courts, by employers, by the same systems that claimed to be fair. These weren't statistics to him, these were people. People who had stories and struggles and strength. Denis didn't want to preach to them. He wanted to stand with them, so he did. He joined Black Power. Most people didn't understand it then. Some still don't. Why would a white man join a Maori gang? Why would someone who once studied theology sit at the table with men who had criminal records? Denis never gave a rehearsed answer. He lived it. Every day. And over time people began to see what he saw. He was the kind of man who spoke up inside the gang. He wasn't there to blend in. He was there to challenge what didn't sit right. And one of the things he stood firmly against was a practice known as blocking, a violent, abusive ritual that had hurt too many. Denis didn't turn his head. He didn't excuse it. He called it out, loudly, publicly. And in doing so, he helped change how the gang treated its own. That took more than courage. It took commitment. But his fight didn't stop there. In time, methamphetamine became a different kind of poison, one that tore through families faster than fists ever could. Denis knew the drug was bigger than the streets. It was eating people from the inside out. When his close friend, Hone Day, took his own life during a meth-induced psychotic episode, Denis reached a breaking point. That death was personal. It wasn't a headline. It was a funeral. It was grief. And from that moment on, Denis made it his mission to fight meth with everything he had. He didn't do it alone. He teamed up with people from the other side of the line, members of the mongrel mob, long-time rivals of Black Power. He didn't care about colors anymore. He cared about the children who were being raised by addicts, the parents who were watching their kids disappear, the friends who kept dying before they turned 40. Together, they organized community events, recovery concerts, workshops, outreach programs. Denis believed that people didn't change because they were told to. They changed because someone stood beside them when they were at their lowest. And that's exactly what he did. He took his message to Parliament. He spoke with politicians from all sides, not to point fingers, but to push for real solutions. He wasn't asking for sympathy, he was demanding action. Cross-party collaboration, less blame, more help. Denis had seen too many promises, too many headlines. He wanted to see change. He's never claimed to be perfect. He knows the history of the gang. He knows where it's failed. But he also knows what's possible when someone refuses to give up on people that others have written off. Denis didn't just carry the patch. He carried the burden of trying to change what that patch meant. Decades later, he's still standing, still speaking, still fighting for the same people who welcomed him when he chose to walk away from comfort. He didn't join Black Power to be accepted. He joined to make a difference. And he has. Gang members are treated as throwaways. Denis O'Reilly became the exception, not because he wore a different color, but because he showed what it looks like to speak into the fire and stay there until something shifts. Bill Maung never wore a patch. He didn't stand on street corners, he didn't take part in gang rituals or throw punches to earn his place. But without him, parts of Black Power's evolution might never have happened. His name doesn't come up in heated arguments or gang police briefings, and that's exactly how he liked it. Born in Burma, now known as Myanmar, Bill was not an ordinary man. During the Second World War, he served in the British colonial army. He saw what real war looked like. He saw governments rise and fall, and when the political structure in his home country began to crumble, he knew it was time to leave. It wasn't a journey of ambition, it was survival. He fled his homeland in 1967, carrying the memories of conflict, of displacement, and of a country that no longer felt safe. New Zealand became his new home. Bill didn't arrive to start over quietly. He arrived with ideas, with knowledge, and with a strong sense of how political systems work. In the early 1970s, through mutual networks, he connected with Denis O'Reilly, one of Black Power's rising voices. Their bond wasn't built on background, it was built on purpose. Denis had the drive, Bill had the experience. He never tried to lead the gang. He didn't speak for them. He listened. He observed, and when the time came, he advised. While others in Black Power were focused on survival and local presence, Bill was thinking beyond that. He believed that if the gang wanted long-term influence, they had to understand how power actually moves from communities through policies and into the decisions that shape lives. Quietly, he began helping the gang build connections. He understood how to talk to people in suits without losing the voice of those on the ground. He helped translate community needs into political language. And he didn't stop there. Bill played a key role in guiding the gang's leadership on how to approach members of parliament, how to build relationships with government officials, and how to request funding for community development without being brushed aside. He understood the system because he had lived inside it. While many viewed Black Power through the lens of criminal activity, Bill Mong was busy showing its leaders that influence doesn't always come from fear. Sometimes it comes from being prepared, being organized, and knowing what to ask for. His approach reflected a philosophy of self-reliance, something he shared with then Prime Minister Robert Muldoon. Their values didn't always align, but there was enough common ground to push conversations forward. Bill believed in encouraging Maori and Pasifika communities to take control of their futures, not by asking for pity, but by demanding opportunity. He never stepped into the spotlight. He didn't seek recognition. His influence wasn't loud, but it was steady. People who worked with him knew what he brought to the table, and the gang members who listened to him came away with a different understanding of what power could look like. He gave advice that lasted longer than any patch or territory. To some, Bill Mong was an outsider. To others, he was the mind behind some of Black Power's most strategic steps forward. He understood that behind every movement, there must be someone thinking quietly, asking the right questions, and planning what comes next. In the story of Black Power, Bill Mong's name doesn't echo through prisons or police reports. But in the rooms where real decisions were made, he was there, calm, unseen, but never without purpose. Eugene Ryder didn't enter the gang world looking for power. He entered it looking for safety, looking for family, looking for something, anything, that didn't hurt as much as what he had already been through. He was a child when the damage began, taken into state care, removed from his home, promised protection. What he got instead was pain, abuse, isolation. Authority figures who were supposed to guide him ended up doing the most harm. And like too many others in his generation, Eugene was left to figure out on his own how to carry wounds no child should have to bear. When he found Black Power, he didn't see it the way outsiders did. To him, it wasn't about fear, it was about belonging. These were men who had been through the same things, who didn't flinch when he talked about where he came from, who didn't ask him to hide the parts of himself that the rest of the world had already turned away from. It wasn't a perfect place, but it felt like home. Over time, Eugene built a reputation, and not always for the right reasons. He has 48 convictions, multiple prison terms, violence, theft, destruction, things he won't deny, things he owns, because he understands that healing doesn't start with pretending, it starts with telling the truth. But that's not where his story ends. In the last 15 years, something changed. Slowly, quietly, but clearly. Eugene began to shift his focus. He started working with others who had lived through state abuse. He stood up not as a victim, but as someone willing to speak when others couldn't. He testified before the Royal Commission of Inquiry into historical state abuse, putting his own trauma into words that carried weight far beyond his own story. It wasn't easy, but it mattered. He also became a social worker, a justice advocate. Someone who still wears the patch but carries a different mission. He doesn't run from where he's been, he uses it. He walks into rooms with government officials, lawyers, police officers, not as a criminal asking for mercy, but as a man pushing for solutions that go deeper than headlines. Eugene has publicly challenged the push for gang patch bans. He argues that taking away clothing doesn't take away pain. It doesn't fix broken homes. It doesn't replace education or mental health support or the trust that was lost a long time ago. In his view, real reform doesn't come from punishment. It comes from understanding, from listening, from facing the parts of this country's history that are easier to ignore. He believes in accountability, but he also believes in context. You can't ask a man to change if you've never given him the tools to survive in the first place. Eugene isn't asking people to forget his past. He's asking them to see what he's trying to build now. He's not interested in respectability. He's interested in truth, in conversations that lead to fewer young boys growing up with stories like his, in giving others a chance to walk away from the pain before it defines them the way it once defined him. There are still people who don't trust him, who think once you cross certain lines, you shouldn't get to speak in rooms that carry weight. But Eugene speaks anyway, because the story he carries is not his alone. It belongs to thousands of others who never got the chance to speak at all. He didn't get to choose what happened to him as a child, but now, every day, he chooses what to do with it. And for Eugene Ryder, that means helping others walk a different path, even if he has to walk it first. Hira John Wharepapa, a 33-year-old man with distinctive facial tattoos, has been involved in criminal activities in New Zealand. In 2014, at the age of 26, he pleaded guilty to aggravated robbery after committing a knife-point robbery at a restaurant in Gisborne, where he stole $6,000, 0 cents. As of December 2021, Wharepapa is wanted by New Zealand police on outstanding warrants and was last known to be in the KT area of Gisborne. Authorities have advised the public not to approach him. You won't find many interviews with Hira Wereta Papa. His name doesn't show up in political debates, and you won't hear it often on the evening news. But if you talk to those who were there during the early years of Black Power's rise, you'll hear it spoken with a level of respect that doesn't need to be explained. You'll hear it said quietly, carefully, like someone remembering the sound of a door that used to open without a knock. Hira was a key figure in the gang's early expansion, especially across the central North Island. He wasn't loud, he didn't put himself in front of microphones, but those who were inside the room knew his role, and they knew not to test it. He worked closely with Reitu Harris, the founding force behind the gang's formation. While Reitu focused on cultural identity, political alliances, and shifting how the gang was seen by the outside world, Hira made sure things stayed steady on the inside. He wasn't there to win people over, he was there to keep things from falling apart. Within the gang, Hira was known for his discipline, not in the military sense, but in the way he carried himself, the way he handled conflict, and the way he expected others to respect the structure that had been built. In a world where ego and emotion could lead to decisions that cost lives, Hira brought control. He wasn't soft, but he was deliberate. When he spoke, people listened, and when he didn't speak, people paid attention even more. There are stories, quiet ones, of moments where the gang could have split. Moments where different chapters started pulling in different directions. Internal disagreements, power struggles, the kinds of things that have broken other groups in half. Some say Hira helped prevent that, not with speeches, not with fear, but with presence. He knew how to calm situations without escalating them. He knew how to get his point across without needing a crowd to back him up. He rarely appeared in public. That wasn't his style. He worked behind the scenes where decisions were made before anyone else even knew a decision was needed. It's easy to overlook men like that, the ones who aren't chasing attention, but without them the whole thing often falls apart. Hira Wereta Papa didn't build the gang's image, he built its backbone, quietly, patiently, with a level of seriousness that earned him both loyalty and distance. He wasn't the type you called unless you were ready for things to be handled quickly and without confusion, and if he showed up, you already knew what was expected of you. Some of these men found purpose in violence, others tried to pull themselves and others out of it. A few wore the gang patch with pride, a few carried it like a burden. Some looked for belonging, some searched for control, some never had a choice in the beginning, and others kept making the same choices, again and again until the door finally closed behind them. What links all six isn't one clear motive or one single outcome. It's the complexity of lives that were shaped by pain, community, loyalty, and survival. These men didn't follow the same path, but every one of them left a mark on the people around them, on the streets they walked, and on the country that watched them rise, fall, or try to turn things around. Damian Wereta serving time that may never end. Raitu Harris stood in Parliament and once believed his gang could become a movement. Denis O'Reilly challenged his own brothers and brought a message of recovery to the places that needed it most. Mong came from another country and quietly helped shift the gang's direction from behind the scenes. Eugene Ryder went from a prison cell to the witness stand, speaking out for those who never had the chance. And Hira Wereta Papa, the man with the distinctive tattoos, is now being sought by police. His name, his presence, and his actions continue to raise questions about where this story ends and where it began. These are not clean stories. They're not designed to comfort, but maybe they're worth hearing because they force us to ask the harder questions. How much of a man's life is decided before he even knows he's allowed to choose? Can a person truly change when they've lived most of their life surrounded by violence, silence, and systems that fail them early? Or is change something that only some men ever get the chance to reach? Which of these six stood out to you the most, and why? Do you believe real reform is possible for someone like Damian? Or do you think some men carry too much damage to turn things around? Drop your thoughts in the comments, speak your mind, your voice matters here, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We cover the stories others don't. The next case is already on its way.